you really don't want to miss this podcast because it's unusual that you're going to find a supply chain in the food industry as well organized as this one is. Hi there, food enthusiasts. Thanks for tuning in to Future Foodcast, where thought leaders in today's food industry discuss the trends and technology that will shape the future of food. Today, we're speaking with Craig Morris, and Craig is the CEO of Alaska Pollock organization. And Craig, maybe you can introduce yourself and give us a little bit more about your background and Alaska Pollock and what you're trying to accomplish.
Thanks a lot, Jim. It's really, let me begin by saying it's a pleasure to be here with you today and sort of share some of our experiences with your listeners. Again, my name is Craig Morris. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Association of Genuine Alaska Pollock Producers, and we're the marketing arm for the U.S. wild Alaska pollock industry. And for those not familiar with it, wild Alaska pollock is the most consumed wild-caught fish in the world. We're also the largest certified sustainable fishery in the world. And for those of you that are familiar with our products, you'll know us as a mainstay in the frozen food aisle of the grocery stores, and obviously as a core menu item in the quick service restaurants. And during COVID, obviously, those were two channels that over-indexed compared to other food channels in the marketplace. And so we were definitely a beneficiary of that. But at Genuine Alaska Pollock Producers, what we really work to do is ensure that Alaska pollock is brought to market in new forms, placed in new channels, and associated with influencers, all with the intended effect of raising demand for our fish and really building out a more varied portfolio of different product offerings and obviously channels that consumers can find it in.
Excellent. Yeah, so that's a quick overview. So help me understand the foundations. I mean, I know the organization, when was the organization founded?
Well, Genuine Alaska Pollock Producers really has two chapters in its history. It was actually founded way back in 2003. It was established primarily by the sales teams of our member companies to really address near-term sales issues. And that ranged from everything from when there was the tsunami in Japan and concerns about radioactivity going into the Pacific Basin. There were customer concerns about whether or not Alaska pollock was safe to eat. When consumer groups were concerned about the way we catch our fish, if it could damage the ocean floor, and we needed to do research to demonstrate that no, we midwater trawl, and that method of catch has virtually no impact on the marine ecosystem. A variety of things that we've had to address over the years to really address, again, sales issues. In 2018, the industry leaders came together and said they wanted to evolve GAPP beyond that low level of investment that it historically had, that was basically just addressing individual issues on a somewhat disparate a framework, to a more coordinated, full-fledged marketing organization with a strategic plan with the overarching goal of building demand. So I was recruited into Alaska Pollock Producers. Actually, I was the head of export marketing for the U.S. pork industry. I was brought in to do for Alaska Pollock what had been done in pork. And if for those of you not familiar with it, U.S. pork went from a net importer to today, U.S. pork is the world's largest exporter. And Alaska pollock industry here in the United States wanted to see similar sorts of success. And we've been really pleased with the results we've had to date. This past year, Alaska pollock jumped from the number 4 to the number 3 consumed fish in the United States. And we still have room to grow. And I think we've got a great future ahead of us with this coordinated approach that we're building for ourselves.
Excellent. Am I right or incorrect? I'm trying to understand. I think you have some I call it the suppliers in your network are if I got it right, I'll call it a registered group that are legally allowed to fish for Alaska pollock. Is that correct?
That's right. The Alaska pollock fishery is somewhat unique in the world. I would like to say that Alaska learned from the struggles that many other fishing countries and fishing regions endured during their history. Alaska truly has sustainability written into the state constitution, and the federal government recognized that this resource that Alaska has in its biomass in the fishery was something that needed to be sustained in perpetuity for many generations to come. And one of the things that was constructed was a system where it's a public-private partnership where the government, the industry, and the nonprofits all sit together, do an assessment of what the biomass is, how much Alaska pollock is actually in the Bering Sea and the Gulf of Alaska, And then they determine what's called a total allowable catch. And there's only a number of companies that own a share of that total allowable catch. And so those companies basically work under this established sustainable framework to make sure that each year we take about 15% of the biomass. And that's proven to be very important in our maintaining a consistent catch, which each year is about 3.3 billion pounds. And I think really anyone in the world in the wild caught fishery industry would look at the Alaska framework is really the gold standard for the world in terms of sustainability and ensuring that biomass, again, is available for future generations.
Yeah, that's actually a huge deal. I come from New England. That's where I'm based. And I kind of grew up here. And it's a very bad story over here. So when I was a kid, we had unlimited fishing. And then the whole thing basically collapsed because it was badly overfished for sure. And so we were probably, I'll call it a motivational factor in coming up with regulations like that make sense. And so, we're working to recover, but the answer is it's nice to see a state actually take control and try to manage that actively up front. That's awesome.
It's those lessons that were really applied to this fishery. My family, I have family that came outside of New Bedford, Massachusetts. And so I too know the struggles that many fishing communities have had. And I think in the case of Alaska, they wanted to ensure that the communities never faced the struggles that many other seafaring communities have had to face in their histories.
So tell me a little bit, just at a high level. So you're an organization that's more than, I'll call it just marketing. You're a research organization. I'll call it a trade organization, sort of a bunch of different roles, for this unique industry, as you say. Within this, if I look at stakeholders, I don't know how big your staff is in the organization, but you have these, I'll call it supplier companies that are members of your organization. And they're the ones that are providing the funding and so on. And they're the ones that provide the product as well. If I look and try to figure out who the stakeholders are in your whole network, I would say, you've got people you're supplying to, you've got communities you operate in, you've got suppliers. Help me get a picture of all the different stakeholders you serve.
You bet. So as I said, the Wild Alaska Pollock fishery is a rationalized fishery. So there's a closed circle of companies that have, under federal law, the ability to go catch the fish each year. Also under federal law, 10% of the catch is in perpetuity reserved for what are called community development quota group holders. And those CDQs, as we call them, are the 65 Native communities that border the resource. So in federal law, those 65 Native American community or Native communities in Alaska have ownership of 10% of the catch. And in large measure, they lease that back to the company. So it's a revenue stream for those communities. And so that obviously builds a lot of economic development in the Alaska Native Community Network. And it's something that we're really proud of. Our membership also includes those that supply the industry, everyone from those that sell us our sonar equipment to the diesel on our ships, to the banks and insurance companies that we do business with. And then the downstream partners, that's the Gordons that sell the fish sticks that are very proud to put Alaska Pollock on the front of pack, the Transoceans and Aquamars that sell surimi seafood in US and foreign markets as well, and large food service companies like the King and Prince Seafoods and the Highliner Seafoods. Those are all members of Genuine Alaska Pollock Producers and invest in us to do, as you had said, research on their behalf and then action that research through what we call our brand partnerships.
Excellent. So, so you're selling to, I'll call it manufacturers like Gordon's and so on. And then do you have other channels as well that you're selling to?
Yeah, and we talked about that at the beginning. Alaska Pollock over-indexes in two channels: the frozen food aisle, the grocery store, and in the quick service restaurants. And those are two channels that did phenomenally well during COVID. If you look at Alaska Pollock, our catch, overwhelmingly our product is exported abroad, though. The vast majority of our surimi goes into Asia. In fact, the largest market for our fillet is Europe. If you go into, let's say, Germany, for example, you can't walk into a Lidl or an Aldi and not see Alaska Pollock in their frozen cases. Anything from what they call a fish finger, which is what they call their fish sticks, to things called Schillinger fillets, which are just almost like a throw in the oven seafood dinner. Americans eat a little over 19 pounds of seafood per person per year. Germans eat considerably more than that. And so in the case of the German market and the European market in general, Alaska Pollock enjoys a very strong demand for our fillet. And then, as I said, our surimi products, which are very common here in the United States, and imitation crab, take on a whole new art form in Asia, and all kinds of things from fish cakes to fish balls that go into their hot pots, and a variety of other things that we see in the Asian market. And then our fish has a very prized other component, which is its roe. And its roe overwhelmingly goes to Japan and is prepared into beautiful cuisine called mentaiko and other preparations that are very, very popular in gift giving and high-end dining.
So it's interesting because I've seen on your website, which is really well done. Well, I guess I like your website for many reasons. One of the things as a consumer coming in is I can learn not only a lot about the organization, but a lot about obviously Pollock, the product and all the different ways it can be used. I'll accuse you guys of making some stuff on the site that looks way too good. There was a recipe for a fish sandwich that should be illegal in at least 20 states for sure. That was not right. But minus that, I'll say, I'm looking around and going, well, where am I going to get that sandwich? I can't find it. I have to go out and buy the product and make it myself, unfortunately. But you do have some great things on the website. But when I look at how, I think the biggest thing I'll say, I'm a consumer, I fit in that stakeholder space. I'm not obviously the retail channel, but you're winding up serving what I call a lot of education off your site to a lot of different types of groups, which is really a big deal. And I'm guessing, as you said, that's probably a major change in direction, since you arrived, that, if I looked at what the organization was doing prior, it was solving problems for sure, but it wasn't really a large educational mission, which it appears from what you say, looks like it's been highly successful in creating demand across different segments, as you pointed out.
No, you're absolutely right. Alaska Pollock is a product that when I came to the organization and sat down and looked at the available data, we looked at it as sort of a product that was hidden in plain sight. Consumers were enjoying us, but they were enjoying us as a product and a brand that they enjoyed. It was sort of that intel inside. People looked at it as an anonymous whitefish, and products like the Gordon's fish sticks, like their McDonald's filet of fishes, like their imitation crab that they're enjoying, and such things as a California roll, but they really weren't thinking of it as Alaska Pollock. And so that was really the first thing that we did when we built that website, was first and foremost built it as a B2B site, that it provided our downstream partners with the information that they needed to ensure that if they put Alaska Pollock in their ingredient statement, or if they put Alaska Pollock on their front of pack, that they had information about our fish that would help drive sales for their brand. We wanted them to feel good about the fact that our product is 100% from Alaska, that it's wild caught, that it's mild tasting, that it has an unmatched nutritional story, and then finally that it's sustainable. And not just sustainable in terms of preserving the fish for future generations, but sustainable in a more holistic standpoint in terms of the low carbon footprint and a variety of other things. So the B2B construct of the website was very important to us in making sure that brands could action the research that we were doing. But we also knew that we had a consumer face to it as well. And so we knew that when you have a product that's, again, somewhat hidden in plain sight and consumers were enjoying you, but they didn't know what it was that they were enjoying, we had one opportunity to introduce the fish. And so we built the website really all around how do we introduce this fish to a base that's already enjoying it. And that was really built around those 5 pillars I just talked about: wild caught, Alaska origin, mild taste, unmatched nutrition, and sustainability, but also helping people action that, giving them those craveable recipes like you saw with the fish sandwich, and then even adding a where to find on the website itself. So if you saw a product that you liked, you saw a recipe that you liked, you knew where to get the ingredients that were in that recipe. That was really important for us as well. And overwhelmingly, you'll see on that where to find, it's very brand centric. We want, frankly, all boats to float higher. And we know that brands can really do enjoy a higher consumer recognition than our fish does currently. So we want to be very brand forward and have them proud to put our name on the front of their package, and hopefully then really move that demand curve upward for our fish as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I have talked to some of the food manufacturers as well, some of the processors, like in Slade Gordon up in Boston. I know they process your product and so on. And it is you're right, well regarded by them for what it does as a product. In fact, they, for a while, I know, actually had I call it a value add line, where they took your pollock and made recipes out of it and shipped it off to Walmart and places like that.
Absolutely right.
There was a point they were doing that as well, for sure. But yeah, and yeah, having talked to, I'll call it a couple of those CEOs, I know they definitely appreciate, in a sense, the high value that your product gives them as a business, for sure, because there's very high demand now for that on their end. A little bit about you mentioned there was a carbon research study you did. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so when I came to GAPP and we had the higher level investment from the membership, we really sat down and started with a group of focus groups. We hired a PR firm, Ketchum, here in the United States, to sit down with focus groups and determine of all the factual attributes of the fish, what were the ones that really resonated with them. Again, if we're going to introduce this fish to America on front of pack, if we're going to start doing some form of generic marketing campaign, what are the factors of the fish that we should really lean in on? And one of those factors, again, was sustainability. But when we really peeled sustainability back, one of the things that in the seafood industry, we tend to look at sustainability is preservation of that biomass, that we're not overfishing the fish.
Right.
But when you talk to consumers, more and more, they're really concerned about, is this food good for the planet? And when we started asking those focus groups more and more about that, it wasn't so much when they were eating fish, they were concerned about overfishing. It was when they were eating food, was the food good for the climate? And so we sat back and said, intuitively, we believe it is, but we don't have any scientific data to prove it. And there is within that community that are looking for sustainability around their food choices, or wanting to know that if they have concerns about the impact that their dietary choices have on climate change, there's a substantial percentage of those consumers that want proof points behind that. They don't just want a marketing claim, they want science. So we went out and hired Qantas International. They're the highest, best regarded, frankly, in the space of what are called life cycle assessments, where they sat down with our industry and looked at everything we do, how much diesel it takes for us to catch a ton of fish, what do we feed our workforce, what are our packaging materials, where do we ship the product, how do we ship it, our electrical usage, everything that goes into producing a pound of Alaska Pollock, and came up with this life cycle assessment that we unveiled here earlier this year that did establish that Alaska Pollock is in fact a food with a very low carbon footprint, especially compared with virtually any other protein out there. And I think that was something that, again, our industry believed to be true, but we were really proud to actually have a number. So a lot of us have put a lot of effort into making sure that our downstream partners too, those Gordons and those that we've talked about, have the information available to them that if their customers are asking, is this product good for the planet? They've got those proof points that they can say, why, in fact, yes, it is. And if you want it on a scale, we can compare it to other foods out there to show you just how good it is.
Yeah, so your site certainly does provide a lot of that detail. And you're also correct, I'll say the hidden in plain sight theme, that a lot of the people who are making product from your stuff, you're right, I don't go into McDonald's and say, oh, what's the most sustainable food I see on the menu there? So there's some opportunity for them to pick up, in a sense, from your research and try to do more to sort of promote what they're doing a little bit, which is a big deal.
Yeah, you raise actually an important point that once we started down the path of doing the life cycle assessment, primarily because of our consumer testing, we have more and more been asked, because our product is so prominently featured in Fortune 500 firms, as well as international firms that sell food. We continue, we are now beginning to be asked much more so, what is our carbon footprint? Because a lot of these Fortune 500 firms, and especially some of our European retailers, are making carbon commitments, trying to move towards carbon neutral. And they need to understand, when they make those commitments, the sort of offsets that they're looking for their entire supply chain. And we all know what the carbon impacts are of certain products like beef, and a few of those that are talked a lot about in the media. But we had to, for our product, because we're so prominently displayed in things like a Walmart, as we discussed, or a McDonald's, or a Lidl, or an Aldi over in Europe, we had to have hard data that we could provide them for our product as delivered to their market. So it's this life cycle assessment research that we did with Qantas actually ended up having not only the intended effect of having a good consumer message around it, but it's actually proven to be very timely and valuable information for that B2B network as well.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me too, the way you described earlier, all of the different types of products that different companies are getting from your catch, if you will, it doesn't sound like there's a lot of the catch that goes to waste. I mean, you described the roe and everything else. So I'm guessing in your life cycle assessment, it probably comes up that you're, I'll call it relatively low on the waste side for sure.
You're absolutely right. One of the things in the Alaska fishery is a relatively young fishery compared to other fisheries. Most fisheries grew up near population centers. So when we talk about, our families from Massachusetts or New England area, or the fisheries off of England or off of Europe or off of Asia, those are typically closer to population centers. The Alaska fishery was always a remote fishery up in the far north, in the Bering Sea. So they, just to be cost competitive with other fisheries that were closer to population centers years ago, they had to be more efficient from the outset. And so what you see leaving Alaska, all of our product essentially is leaving as boneless fillets, boneless blocks of surimi, frozen in container ship, our roe products. And then the products that normally would end up in the trash, we're actually converting in Alaska to fish oil that goes into supplements for high omega-3 supplements, or in fish meal that goes into a variety of institutional uses as well. So basically everything that leaves Alaska is in saleable form, and very little of that is being wasted. And that's actually one of the next research projects that we have on our to-do board, is to address food waste, that we know intuitively. We have a great story to tell with Alaska Pollock with a ridiculously low food waste. If you buy a fish stick, or you buy a fish fillet sandwich, or you buy a surimi stick, you eat the whole thing. None of that ends in the trash. And because it's frozen, oftentimes none of that's going to end up into waste. It's not going to spoil in the fridge, or a variety of other things that more perishable foods sometimes have to do. So we know we've got a great story to tell there, and that's going to be, frankly, one of our next research projects that we're going to put underway, is our food waste story as well.
Yeah, so, and help me out, but I'll say a high percentage of the inventory that you bring in and process, most of that, I'll guess, is, I'll call it cold chain related. There's almost everything uses cold chain technology, I assume.
Absolutely. Virtually everything that ships out of Alaska in fillet and surimi block and roe is leaving frozen and remains frozen all the way through to preparation. If you go into the plants that are producing that fillet of fish, or the plants that are producing that ultimate fish stick at Costco, that product is never even thawed. It is kept in that frozen state for beginning to end. And that's one of the reasons that when you bite into that product, it has that unbelievably mild flavor. It's a ridiculously, it can be almost counterintuitive that a product that's frozen in Alaska is actually fresher. But in fact, that's in this case what it is.
Yep. Yeah, and you're right. That's a big thing, is the technology that allows you to do that efficiently end to end. So everything, help me understand the end market, the downstream side. I'm selling off to manufacturers for sure, a whole variety of those all over the world for different types of products. I'm guessing that I'm not selling directly to end retailers in my case. I don't know if that's true or not.
Well, our membership spans the full breadth. The fishing companies, most of those are not consumer brands. Most of those are selling a wholesale product that's converted into a retail brand that you and I would be familiar with. There are exceptions. One of my members, Trident Seafoods, for example, is vertically integrated. So they catch the fish, they process the fish, and they're a consumer brand that you would see very prominently, let's say, in a Costco with the ultimate fish stick, for example. So it's the full breadth, but we do also have, as you had said, the Slade Gordons, the King and Princes, the Highliners, who don't catch Alaska Pollock in Alaska, but do sell a lot of consumer brands that the consumers are familiar with.
Yep. Okay. And the other minor point is that pretty much, I'll say, the bulk of what you're shipping out downstream is all bulk shipments anyway. It's not small shipments either. So that's very efficient as well.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that in our carbon footprint analysis, life cycle assessment, that really came up. Everything that's coming out of Alaska is coming out by container ship, and it's counterintuitive. But the lowest delivery point in terms of carbon footprint is actually Busan, South Korea. We can ship very efficiently product from Alaska to Busan, South Korea by container ship. And that's one of the things that consumers often say is that just doesn't make sense. But we aren't shipping trucks from coast to coast. We aren't shipping small volumes of product in little boats. These are large vessels that catch an amazing amount of fish per net run. And that's one of the things that the Alaska pollock fish isn't a huge fish individually. It's only about 18 inches long. They only weigh 700 to 800 grams. They're not huge fish, but they school together unbelievably tight. And it's a very clean biomass, very little bycatch. And so when our ships find the schools and drop the nets, they bring on board a volume of fish that's frankly unmatched in the wild caught fisheries of the world.
Yeah, and so it does sound like the area, the fishery itself is a unique, as you point out, place. It's not like, as you said, off the coast of New England or New York, where I originally grew up, where you have to say, oh my God, you're fishing in Long Island Sound. Well, it's going to be shut for the next 3 months while they wait for the waters to clear up so they can open up the fishery again. So it's very different, which is nice. And it's nice that it stays that way. So tell me a little bit from your point of view. What impacts do you see longer term now that we're coming out of the pandemic? Any changes in the industry on your end from that?
Yeah, change is the only constant. That is for sure. As I said, we were in the right place at the right time during COVID. That frozen food aisle and the quick service restaurants that had drive-through capability. But as they say in the stock market, past performance is not a predictor of future results. What we're focused on at Genuine Alaska Pollock Producers is diversification. We want to see our fish in new channels. We want to see it in new forms, and we want to see it associated with influencers, if for any other reason, for risk management. We know that the more channels you're in, the more products you have on the market, you can withstand any challenges in any one particular product form or product channel. So what we're doing right now is because, frankly, we did so well during COVID. We're giving back. We're now undertaking a series of what we call restaurant weeks. Now, we did one last year in Nashville, and we have one coming up next month in Chicago, where we're donating Alaska Pollock to higher end restaurants to get them familiar with the fish and proud to serve the fish. We know that the restaurant community, especially the high-end sit-down restaurant community, has had struggles through COVID. And we know that they're going to have to come to terms with, if they want to keep menu prices where they were before, looking for product forms or raw materials that potentially come in at a little lower price point. We believe we have a fish with an amazing story. It's domestic, it's wild caught, it's got that great nutrition, mild taste, checks a lot of boxes. And we want them to feel proud in putting it on their menu. So we're really working to elevate the fish in terms of getting it on higher end menu applications. We just announced 20 new partnerships. We've made an investment of $1.6 million in 20 new partnerships to put Wild Alaska Pollock in new forms. So we have a bunch of very exciting new products that are coming out from our brand partners and some of our food service partners as well. So right now, our focus is all about diversification. It's not that we don't want people to love their fillet of fish. We want them to love their fish stick, but we know we've got to be in a number of other product forms as well. One of the product forms, about half of our production goes into surimi manufacture. Yeah. We just conducted a nationwide qualitative and quantitative survey here in the United States on imitation crab and found two things. One, the more consumers learned about imitation crab, the more they knew it wasn't imitation, it's real seafood, and the more they liked it. And then the second thing we learned was the more recipe ideas people had with what to do with it, the more apt they were to put it in their grocery cart. So we're going to have a major push this year, partnering with some influencers around the holiday season to really get surimi top of mind. As food prices are getting high, crab prices in particular are getting very high. Yes. We want people to know that surimi seafood is a viable alternative. It's a domestically produced product. It's healthy, and it's unbelievably versatile. And it comes in at, frankly, a great price point.
Well, you're right about the versatility thing. I think that's the key, is that it is, in a sense, a product you can do so much with on the preparation side to make it different. So for me, I'm the guy that's going to get the fish sticks out of the store, and that's about as far as I go. I have no creativity. I just eat. I consume. That's all I do. But my son, on the other hand, he is a real chef, and he's exactly what you're talking about. He's the guy that you say, hey, take a look at this product, and then take a look at all of the options. Tell me what you can do to it. It's almost like you could have a contest on your website, say, come up with the most creative, a pollock-based recipe kind of a thing. And, you certainly have a lot of talented chefs out there that would come up with some pretty great ideas, much like the restaurant weeks you're talking about, where you're providing that right now, which is pretty cool. So that's a big place to go, is trying to diversify, as you said. So yeah, it's a highly, I'll call it, sustainable life cycle end to end that you've got. You got a bunch of stakeholder communities. I'm on the far end. I'm the guy that eats it. So I can't help much the rest of the life cycle, but it's nice to know and understand that story. And to your point, I think, as you said, you've got a fair amount of the product is in other things. It's, as you said, it's in imitation crab or whatever I'm consuming. I just don't know the story behind it. And so finding a way to link the story to what's really going on is a big deal. And I can't tell you how often in life consumers like myself don't really know how something is made or what it's worth. To give you a bad example, I used to manufacture brass key tags. So you go to the store, like Things Remembered, you'd say, oh, I'll get a key tag and I'll put my son's name on it, give it to him. It said brass key tag. Well, we did a lousy job of educating you, because that brass key tag, it was solid brass. Fair enough. Bigger problem was people didn't understand what brass really looked like. So we actually put real gold plate on the brass. So you were buying a gold-plated key tag that was sold only as a brass key tag when it wasn't brass. We were actually getting gold, because my manufacturing process wasn't as good as my competitors. I actually accidentally put too much gold, about double the gold that my competitors did, because my plating process wasn't as good. But that's an idea of where consumers learning, in a sense, more about the source is a big deal. And so I'm not sure what the strategy is going forward, but it would be nice to say, yeah, look at me, I got a fish sandwich from McDonald's or wherever it is, and what am I really eating somehow? So you're right, helping those companies push that story out as part of their improvement on nutrition, because they're under pressure all the time, right? So you look at McDonald's as an example, any of those chains is saying, how do you come up with a more nutritious menu, in effect? That pressure is always going up, not down on those outlets. So it becomes a challenge for them. And your support of them is a big, big deal going forward, I think. So hopefully that'll work out. Tell me a little bit. So you have this, I'll call it, very complex network, if you will, of different channels, different consumers with, I'll call it, even whether I'm saying it's a chef, trying to put a product out in a restaurant, it's an end consumer like myself going down a shopping aisle, doesn't matter what the country is. And then you have manufactured products for different corporations as well. So when you add all that together, there's a fair amount of complexity. How do you wind up integrating all that? Is there anything technology-wise that's helping you pull this whole network together?
We're really fortunate. We have a great traceability system as an industry, and that's one of the things that I think you're going to start hearing a lot more about when people talk about Alaska Pollock is our traceability. One of our brand partners that we're working with now, Neptune, they do a fish jerky that you can get. They started on Amazon because they had a product launch period during COVID. So that was the channel that worked best for them. But you're going to start seeing it more now in grocery stores. And one of the things that their product does, because it's Alaska Pollock sourced and many other competing proteins can't do, it has a QR code on the back. You can actually use your phone, and that QR code will tell you not only where the product was caught, but the name of the boat that the fish was caught on. We have a hyper level of transparency that we can provide to our downstream partners if they want to convey that on. And so when you look at it from our standpoint, the logistics required for a fishery of our scale, going into all of these different products, that traceability system that we built in is what we're going to bring to bear to really help us with that. And so I think one of the things, again, coming from a pork industry with 66,000 independent pork producers in the United States, we have a very comparatively small number of vessels out there that capture our fish and process it in many cases on the boat into frozen fillets, or on onshore plants in Alaska into those frozen fillets. We have the ability now to transmit that data downstream. And at GAPP, obviously, we get that and put out each week for our membership, weekly fishery reports that to the pound tell everybody exactly where we're at by product form, where is it going. It's an amazing amount of technology that we have built into our system that I think we're just now beginning to understand how to best utilize.
Yeah, that's excellent. So Yeah, and the big impact and the reason all this matters, I think, is among other things, besides the health aspects, is that in the U.S. we have that Food Safety Modernization Act that kicks in 2024. And if you look at the rules on traceability forward and back, they sound very much like what you're already providing on that end of the channel. It's the upstream, or sorry, the downstream side from you
Right.
that is still challenged, trying to meet those requirements for 2024. So as an example, I did talk to Slate Gordon. They have traceability as well, but to your point, it's like I get it. I get my fish sandwich at McDonald's, and no, I can't find out. I can't scan my phone over my fish sandwich and say, "Oh, look, there's the boat. I can see it now." So there are limits right now, but you're right. That'll eventually improve as we add more technology into it for sure.
Yeah,
And one of the other thing too, it's not just the traceability for food safety. The other thing is, I'll call it from as you say, consumers are becoming more demanding all over the place. And it really creates a stronger sense of identity. So like I'm familiar with, I'll call it the coffee and the tea world now, where it's very common that you scan, as you say, your phone on the back of the pack and find out, ooh, it came out of, Juan Gomez's coffee farm in, Colombia somewhere. And you get that identity. It's not just, yes, I know the source and it's validated and I can trace it from a safety perspective, but I also can establish the identity back, to the grower or the producer in effect, and feel a stronger sense of that. So in some cases, what they're doing now is offering what I call tipping apps, where you can actually tip, the producer in a sense and say, hey, that's great, Pollock or whatever it is, and the identity becomes stronger. It sounds crazy, but for your members, the firms in effect that are producing all the fish, it's nice to be able to have an identity there as well that eventually comes through the channel. And technology is going to help you do that, obviously.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think we've been fortunate that we've been hugely dependent on the Asian market for many years now. And I think that know your farmer, know your food sort of catchphrase that we have here in the United States now is something that's existed in Asia and Japan in particular for many years already. And I, when I joined the industry, had the fortune of going to our roe auction, which is where we sell, again, these very prized eggs that come out of our fish that are harvested during the early parts of our A season. And at the auction, above each of the products being sold, they show the vessel, the information about the vessel, and there are certain boats, certain captains that the Japanese have a preference for. Not that the product is necessarily any different, but they've had good experiences with the product that they bought off of that vessel before and trust it. And it's really interesting to see that sort of preference brought to bear. And if you have ever been to Japan many times, you'll see the picture of the farmer above the beef case when they're selling that prize Shimfori A5, Wagyu beef.
Yep.
People want to know, where did it come from, and know that their money is going to something tangible, something that they can get their head around, and not just a nameless or faceless, industry out there.
Yeah, so in a sense, that investment is paying off not just on the food safety side, but also it creates a stronger brand identity, a higher level of trust for the product, which in the end makes the product, I'll call it a superior product compared to alternatives, which is pretty good. So I think, yeah, obviously you have a great story there as well. So that covers a lot of things on my end. I can't think of anything else I've missed. Is there anything else from a topic perspective that I haven't hit on your end yet?
No, I think one of the things I'd recommend to the listeners is, as you pointed out, we do a lot of research. I've spent a lot of time with commodity organizations in my career in terms of return on investment. The greatest thing they can do for an industry, if you have a generic marketing organization, is do that research and make sure it's actioned. And so we're right now nationwide. We have our third consecutive year of consumer attitude and awareness studies here in the U.S. Yeah. We actually also have right now deployed in the field to some 14,000 health professionals, better understanding from them their perceptions around Alaska Pollock. When we get those kinds of findings, we want to get them out there for our brand partners, but we want to get them out there for really anyone who's interested in that kind of data, because I think it really helps people understand where the mind of health professionals are now, where the mind of consumers are now, what sort of uptrending in terms of their concerns. We also put out each quarter a consumer trends report where we try to track domestically and abroad what's hot in the marketplace and where are consumers going, so that hopefully we, in the case of Alaska Pollock, can position our fish best against those trends. but I think those are things that are really valuable in agriculture in general. I'm a huge fan of food. I think
Okay.
there's nothing more personal that we do as human beings than eat.
Yeah,
What we
sure.
decide to do each day is a very personal decision, and I celebrate it to the nth degree. You know, I looked at the Anthony Bourdain when I was young as sort of an idol that I wanted to become a chef and live in the back of a kitchen and really celebrate food from around the world and those that have worked in that living thing called a kitchen. And I think one of the things that for those that share that passion, this research that we do around where consumers are at with food are things that can really help inform us on making sure that consumers feel better, you know, frankly, about what they eat. And I think that's one of the things right now that's getting lost in a lot of the marketing campaigns is I think we should be really proud of a lot of the products on the marketplace. And I don't think that gets as much attention sometimes as some of the things that we're concerned about.
Yeah, and you're a great point. And I really do think it's a challenging thing when you look at a long supply chain to do that effectively, especially when it goes to different markets and so on, different processes, different products. Like I said, my McDonald's fish sandwich, it's hard to tell much about that. But the reverse of it is, you're right. When my mom used to grow tomatoes in her backyard or peaches, whatever, and gave them to your mom, it's where the peaches come from, Mrs. Mason's backyard kind of a thing. And so there was a lot more pride in that identity, if you will, and comfort with the sourcing of where it came from. Not so much that we're doing food recalls in those days, but I don't think we just say, no, it's a bad peach and we throw it away. but the reality is, you're correct that we had more identity when we had much shorter supply chains and we didn't have this. And so it is a great story you have to tell. The other thing I liked is the fact that you're actually trying to figure out, doing a great job of trying to identify, is our story getting through?
Yep.
Who's it getting through to? What's the impact? And that's the other side of that equation. You've done an excellent job of doing that as well. So you have to, anytime you're trying to put something out there, you have to ask yourself, what's the best way to understand if we're being effective? And it certainly looks like you're investing in that as well. So excellent.
Thank
So
you.
it's been a great story. It's like I say, you're an unusual industry. I think the organization is really, really valuable. But I, as you said earlier, because the nature of, in a sense, the area you're coming from as a supply, I'll call it the legislated organization that's together, the total available catch or allowed catch, I guess, all of those things put together, it's a unique industry. It's a well-organized organization, and I do think you'll have a lot more room to run as you grow downstream into these different markets and they start to learn more, thanks to the efforts you're making. So with that, Craig, I'll wrap it up. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Jim. I really appreciated the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to Future Foodcast. Future Foodcast is powered by Farm to Plate, the leading food blockchain platform. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date with the very latest innovations in the food industry.